Now we get to the fun part of branding, or what most people think of as the most fun part of branding. I think the whole process is fun. So what we're talking about today is visual assets for your brand, your logo and images. This is part 3 of a 3-part series on branding. Part 1 and 2, I go over identifying your customer and how to talk to them, speak to them in their own language. And then now that we know who they are in detail, in depth, now we can look at your visual assets and creating an identity that's going to attract that perfect customer.
Inkyma's Marketing Strategies is a podcast for small business owners hosted by Audrey Kirchner, co-founder and chief marketing strategist at Inkyma, helping you navigate the world of marketing so that you can market your business in the right way, see growth, and thrive regardless of the industry you're in. To learn more about Inkyma and what we do, ask a question, or schedule a marketing evaluation, go to the website inkyma.com. That's INKYMA.com. Listen to the show on your podcast player of choice, the Inkyma website, or the Inkyma YouTube channel. Just search for Inkyma Marketing Strategies and you'll find what you need.
Okay, so before we begin, let's talk a little bit about the show notes. I'm going to reference documents and previous episodes a lot. I've already done that. Go to the show notes on the website, inkyma.com, INKYMA.com. Go to the podcast, find the episode, and all of the links for you to click through and listen to whatever you want to listen to or read is going to be there. Okay, since this is episode 3 of 3, I want to recap a little bit and set the stage for you about branding. In episode 2, I did a deep dive on what branding actually is, because a lot of people think it's just your logo. So if you haven't checked out that episode, go listen to it. But here's what I was talking about in that episode. There's actually different components to your brand. The first one is how you're perceived by your target audience. Those are your values, your dreams, your philosophy. This is pretty much the easiest one, and it always gets done because you do that when you're creating your company, when you're making the decision, yes, I'm going to build a business. The second part is the language that you use and who you are going to talk to, that voice of the customer and identifying. Then the third part is your visual identity, your logo, your colors, the images, how you're visually going to be represented. These are in order, meaning you need to figure out the first and the second one before you do the third. But most people, they always do the first one because they're like, hey, I want to have a business and here's who I am and here's my why. And then they jump right to number 3 and they totally skip over the customer. So in episodes 37 and 38, links are in the show notes, I talked to you about figuring out who the perfect customer is and gave you an outline into taking a deep dive into who they are, what they like, giving them a name, a face, a feel, and how to go about doing that. And then also how to speak their language. Many times businesses talk about themselves and they talk in their own language. Sometimes they'll even use their internal speak, which will confuse customers, but really you need to speak to them how they want to be spoken to, about their problems, the solutions that they need. And so now that we know what both of those things are, who they are, how they want to be spoken to, figuring out their language, now you can get into the very fun and creative part of a visual identity. The big key with a visual identity is once it's created, it's got to stay cohesive and you have to stay on brand. So what do I mean by cohesive and staying on brand? Let's go through a scenario. Let's say you've created your logo. You've got a beautiful color palette, 2 to 3 colors, 1 to 2 fonts. It's a little sophisticated. So now you're like, hey, everything's going to look great forever. Not so fast. A brand can get watered down over time or diluted. How does this happen? Let's go through a scenario. Let's say you want to buy shirts and hats for you and your team. And you find someone, you got a good price, you know the color of the shirt that you want, and so you give them your JPEG logo so that it can be embroidered on the front and screen printed on the back. Maybe the hats are going to be embroidered too. So the shirt guy takes a look at your logo on his computer and says, okay, here's what I think the colors are. He picks out threads. He picks out screen print colors. So it's not digital. It's actual physical inks that get embedded into the fibers. And it comes back and you're done. Now let's say you give this to a car detailing guy to wrap your vehicles with this beautiful graphic design. He does the same thing. Are the colors they're picking the same? Probably not. Because one, every screen looks different, and what they're doing is a subjective color pull, meaning they're basing what they think their color is for the wrap they're doing, the screen print, or the embroidery thread based off of what they see. And no two people see everything the same. And so because everybody is choosing their own color palette here, that's what's going to water down your brand, because then over time, the more people you give this to, it's going to look different wherever it goes. Maybe your pens are going to look different than your shirt, or maybe you had to reorder shirts and you had to use a new shirt guy. So your older employees have the older shirts with the one color on them, and the newer employees have different colors on their shirts. And that's where brand cohesion breaks down. The same thing can happen with your fonts. They guess at the font that they're seeing rather than downloading a font file because they don't know what the font is. And then it's going to look slightly off or different. Maybe you had letterhead printed or your business cards and they had to try to match the font and it's not exact. So you might be saying, well, why do I care? Seeing those different colors and fonts in different locations over time subconsciously makes people wonder why they're seeing something out of sync, right? They may not say, oh, those are two different colors. They may just go, there's something off here. It feels disjointed. It's not quite right. When you take the words, it's not quite right as a feeling, that leads to distrust. Because think about it, as humans, if we look at a scenario outside of branding, outside of marketing, and we look at it and go, this isn't quite right, our brains are telling us there's something wrong here. And then we immediately become more aware, maybe hypersensitive, and we're waiting for something maybe not so great to happen. And so that's why you want to have a really strong visual identity brand no matter where you go, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to build trust over time with new audiences and existing audiences. Imagine if you took all this time to get a customer and you built this brand and then they start seeing a diluted brand or an off brand over time. Are they going to buy from you again? Maybe, maybe not. Right? Maybe they can't put their finger on why they don't trust it, but you know what? They're going to be safe rather than sorry. And they're going to maybe go look for different options. And then you've just wasted all that awareness and warm audience building that you've created. So that's why it's really important to have a brand. And the other thing I don't want you to do, right? That's something that you may not have been aware of. A lot of people sit there and they tweak their brand. They change the colors because they get bored. You have to realize your client doesn't look at your brand nearly as much as you do. So even if you're bored, you need to leave it alone. You need to make conscious branding changes and decisions, and they need to be short over time. And then it has to be a full rollout, which is not easy. So don't play with your logo. Leave it alone. So this dilution process, it can be solved, and it's actually not that hard. What you need is a style guide, for one. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, so don't worry. And then the other thing is you're going to need someone to keep track of it. Be aware of it. When something goes out, get it checked out. So yeah, you're going to need branding police. When those shirts come back, when they give you the design to say, is this good? Someone's got to go in and check the color numbers and make sure they're right. And if they're not, they have to reject it and start over again. Okay. So that's my little soapbox about cohesive brand, having a strong brand identity where everybody looks. I'm pretty passionate about that. Now let's talk about what makes your visual identity and some key things that you need to think about during the creation or the rebranding process. Okay, now let's talk about the visual components of your brand. But first, I want you to pull out the customer personas that you created when you listened to episode 37. If you haven't listened to episode 37 yet, don't worry. Finish this up, then go listen, do the exercise, and come back to this. It doesn't hurt to listen to this section again. So the first thing is the logo. Yay! Everybody understands they need a logo. But what most people don't understand is that the logo is not for you, the business owner. It's not for your employees. It's actually for that perfect customer that you have figured out who they are and did a deep dive on them. And this is going to go on everything. So it's going to go on your print materials, your digital assets, clothing, vehicles, buildings, on your products. The rule of thumb here is if it's representing your business, you got to put a logo on it. Because otherwise, why create whatever that asset is? And it's really funny because sometimes I'll get something back from one of my designers and it's in the brand colors, but the logo's not on it. And I send it back. I'm like, okay, we need a logo here. Let's grab another cup of coffee and make sure, because we don't put anything out the door without having a logo on it. You want the logo to be full color whenever possible. Some promotional items allow only one color, or it has to be in black and white because of what it is. So you have to have versions of your logo that are that way. But in general, you want to have the full color version wherever possible. And I did mention this, but the logo has to speak directly to your audience. So now what I'm going to do is give you an example of what that means. So using the fake examples that I created in episode 37, those customer personas of the Speechwriter and the beef jerky company, I'm going to talk to you about things we would do when we're creating their logos, just to give you some thoughts and ideas of what I mean by it's got to be for the customer. So let's break this down. So icons and artwork first, right? So for the beef jerky company, which is a natural organic beef jerky company, you may not have an icon or any type of artwork. It may just be the stylized name, because there's nothing iconic about beef jerky and you don't want to put a stick of beef jerky in your logo. It's just visually not going to be appealing. Now, you may need to see this to rule it out for something for your business, but I've been doing this long enough where I can visualize something in my head and I'm like, nope, we're not putting a stick of beef jerky into the logo because it just won't translate well. Now let's look at the Speechwriter. They could use an icon of a pen or any other type of writing thought or thought bubble or talking head type of thing. But for this instance, I think a stylized name is also going to be a better choice here, because those things are probably a little bit too on point or on the nose, meaning they've been done a lot. And this person is not just writing for consumers, they're also writing for business. So they need a logo that's going to work for both, meaning it can't look like someone is doing a toast, because they're doing writing for presentation speeches as well. So now let's move on to color thoughts and options. So for the beef jerky company, natural, handcrafted, artisan type of thing, I think earth colors will work here, except for brown. Brown is a tough color to pull into a logo. It really never looks great. And because this is a food product, the logo itself also has to look appetizing. And brown is just not an appetizing color. So I would stick with yellows and reds and oranges, really warm colors in that earth tone palette would be where we would probably start for someone. Now for the Speechwriter, we need some high trust colors here. So think about this. If you're at a wedding and you're giving a speech, or you're standing in front of an audience of 300 people doing a presentation, you're putting a lot of trust in the hands of the person that wrote for you. And that's why this logo needs to be high trust colors. So high trust colors are your blues, absolutely 100%, and greens. For this one, I do mid-tones or maybe even high energy versions of that as an accent. So I might do like a mid-tone blue with a high energy green associated to it, just to give it a little pop. And since we are in the business space, stay away from feminine colors or pastels, no pinks, no purples, no pastel versions of anything, because you don't want the company to have a feminine feel to it. You want it to be professional. And even women in business, when they have their business hat on, would even probably shy away from these colors because they're like, is this professional or is this really for me? So you got to keep that in mind. So just a note on color theory. It is a whole thought process. I could do an entire episode on color theory, which is what colors mean. They all have meaning. And depending on the culture you're in, the color meaning can change. In other words, white is different for us here in America than it is in Eastern cultures. So you got to be a little careful. If you're going to be an international brand, you really have to think hard about your colors, and you might even have to have multiple options depending on where you're marketing. And so you've got to pick these colors out based on how the customer is going to respond is really what I'm getting at here. So let me give you an example. I have a client who does doggy daycare. And if you're not a dog lover or a dog mom or dad, a lot of people, their dogs are like their kids. They're part of the family. And so this is a high trust environment. I am dropping my dog off to you. You're in charge of my dog and taking care of them until I get back and take over their care. And so my doggy daycare client loves the color maroon, right? Has it in sweatshirts and shirts and everything. And it is a gorgeous color, but it is not the right color for a doggy daycare because it's not a high trust color. It's a very active, vibrant color. And anything in the red family is kind of like that's why stop signs are red. And anything in the red family, stop signs are red. The color of blood is red. So what we did for him is we went into that blue and green family. And because he was consumer oriented, we went with lighter shades of blue or green, happy, fun shades that popped. So this is just an example how color theory came into play with this and how we had to steer him away from his favorite color because it wouldn't translate well to his audience. You are listening to Inkyma's Marketing Strategy, and I'm Audrey Kirshner. This is part 3 of 3 on branding, and today we're talking about your visual identity for your business. Okay, let's move on to fonts. I think fonts are really cool. People think, a font is a font, but fonts actually really speak to people because they have their own artistic flair to them. And you can mix fonts with your logo and get a really professional look. The key is that the fonts have to contrast with each other. So you've got script fonts, which look like handwriting or have that appearance. And then you have sans serif fonts, which are just straight lines that don't have little tack marks on them. And then serif fonts. So when I say little tack marks, think of the capital letter I. In a sans serif font, the capital letter I doesn't have a hat or feet. In a serif font, it has hats and feet. And then that translates out to all the rest of the alphabet. So that's where you can put scripts with sans serif, scripts with serifs, and then a sans serif with a serif. But what you don't want to do is pick the same two typed together that are just slightly different from each other. So no scripting on scripts. The other thing you need to think about with fonts too is that if you do pick two, and that's the reason why we pick two of them a lot, is one of them has to be easy to read in paragraph form, meaning the smaller font point and, lots of the letters all together in words and sentences, right? On business cards, PowerPoints, websites. So some fonts look really great if they're 1 or 2 words and they're really big, but they're very difficult to read when it gets smaller. And there's reasons behind all of this that I could talk about for hours, but then you would fall asleep. And if you're driving, that might be a little bad. Okay, so let's look at our examples and talk about some fonts. So beef jerky, I think a very bold serif font. So with hats and feet for the name, and then a non-bold sans serif font. So no hats and feet for the tagline or some other component, or it doesn't have to be in the logo. It can just be a companion font so that it can be used for content. And it's very neat. It's clean. It's simple, which kind of fits with that whole natural, organic artisan feel. So you got something that's a little crafty and then something that's just clean. For the speechwriter, I would do some type of a script, but a professional script, not something curly Q and flowy, and maybe just as an accent. So 1 or 2 letters here or there, then with a very clean, simple sans serif type of font. And then the other thing that I suggest to folks is that writing font, make sure you match it across in your emails. Certainly any documents you produce, business cards, that's easy, but everybody forgets about their email fonts. And if you can find your font and bring it into your email system, that's just going to really strengthen the brand. But if you can't, go with a basic Arial. So now we're going to move on to image selection and video content. So pull up that voice of the customer and you're going to pick a few images that represent your brand at a high level based off of that voice. And so here's how I want you to do it. So in that voice of the customer question list that I gave you, there was a question that says, what does success look like if the customer chooses you? And you came up with an answer. What I want you to do is find images that represent the answers to that question. You might have put 3 or 4 different things down there, and those are the types of things that you want this image to represent. Because what it does is it visually shows the person looking at it what to expect from your brand. And these type of images are great for the hero images on your website and your social media cover images. You can also put them on your business cards or anywhere else you feel like you want to have something. If you're wrapping a vehicle, that's the image you're going to use to wrap your vehicle, where people are going to see it, where it's 5 and 6 feet tall or even bigger, on the sides of buildings, all kinds of crazy stuff. Okay, so let's talk about our customer persona examples in this respect. So beef jerky. What we want here is a picture of happy, healthy, mostly men, some women, shopping in the store. So if you go back to the persona, I talked about this is a brick and mortar store, 1, maybe 2 locations. It's not a big chain. And so these people are in the store, and then there is a product display in the background, but they're looking happy and healthy. And even you could have them at the counter buying, right? Throw that nudge in there. This is going to be custom photography. You're going to have to set up a photo shoot, but it's definitely going to be well worth it. And you probably have to do a photo shoot anyway for your product shots so that you can have packaging pictures. And if you're doing online sales, so do all of it at one time. So for the speechwriter, you're going to need 2 images. So the first one's going to be one of a person giving a toast in a formal setting. It could be at a wedding, it could be at an anniversary party, but it's them looking happy and confident, and you can see that everybody's giving them a standing ovation. The other picture is going to be a business executive, male or female, probably female, I would say, looking really confident in their suit and presenting in front of a large group of people. And the people look engaged. They're paying attention. They're not looking at their phones. They're not talking to each other. They're engaged and looking at the confident business person standing in front of them. This you should be able to find stock of, both of them. All right, so I did tease out earlier that I was going to talk about what a style guide is. And so a style guide are all the bits and pieces that are used to create your logo. So when you see a logo, you're like, oh, that's nice. I like that red. The font is cute, but what color is it? What font is it? So a style guide, you can get uber fancy. You can do like a 20-page style guide that talks about mood and all this other stuff. But really, if you're a small company or a small brand, the minimum you need is just a 1-page with the following on it. All of your colors. Maybe you've got 2, maybe you've got 3, maybe you've even picked out some accent colors that may not be part of your logo, but they're going to be used in different places when you need like a color boost. You need all the numbers of these colors. So colors are actually numbers. That's how the printer figures it out, the embroidery guy, everybody. So they all have numbers, and you may have used them at some point. If you were putting together some type of a graphic and you needed to match a color, and so they asked you what the hex number is. So the numbers that you're going to need are your CMYK number for print, your RGB number for digital. Those numbers are not the same. A Pantone color number, and that's so that the shirt guy can match the embroidery thread, because if he has a Pantone color number, he can go to his embroidery thread and he actually has mapping that says these Pantone colors match these embroidery thread colors. And there's Pantone, there's a lot of matching. And then of course you need that hex number, because for digital, sometimes they don't want your RGB number. They only want your hex. And so if you're going into a system to do something, video editing system where you got to add some color, graphic design system, anything that we're going to need that hex number. So icons and artwork. We're going to need examples of the different versions of your logo. So for us, when a customer says, I want it to be rectangular, I want it to be long, I want my name to be from left to right, we always create a square version as well. Because in this day and age, we have requirements in many different spots that require a square logo. Your social media profile images, which are usually your business icon, are square. If you're doing digital ads with Google, they want a rectangular version and they want a square version. Instagram is all about the square. So if you only have a rectangular version of your logo and you try to fit that into a square, it's going to be too small. And so you need those two. You're going to need a full color. You're going to need black and white, black and then white. And then if your logo has a little complexity, like there's shading or there's gradations, you're going to need a simplified version because there are some things from a print perspective where the background, the shading, the gradients won't translate well. And so you need it in one color. You might hear people say, this is only a 4-color item. And technically with shading and gradation, it's 6 colors. So you just got to be careful. For color and fonts, the logo there and little pointers saying, this is this color, this is that color, this is this font, this is that font. You got to make it really clear. And then for all of your fonts, add the name of the font and then the link to download it. So you're making it super easy for them to get the font and then use it. And then just an additional note on fonts, wherever possible, whenever possible, we like to use Google fonts. These are all cloud web-based fonts. And what's nice about this is they're free, they're readily available. There's a gazillion out there that cover pretty much everything. And when someone is browsing your site and you're using a web-based font, it will be the font that you want. When you're using different types of fonts, if the font's not readily available, the website's going to default to something else and it may not look quite right. Alrighty, so hopefully you're inspired about branding and rebranding. You're ready to tackle your visual assets. So here are the next steps that I want you to take as soon as you can, because we don't want to waste this half hour. You got all this great information, but now you have to do something with it. So the first thing I want you to do is hire a brand designer, not a graphic designer, not a logo designer, and don't do it yourself. A brand designer is going to think about these things. They're going to understand color theory. They're going to understand sizing of fonts. They're going to understand that it's not for you, it's for your customer. So you give them the persona, the voice of the customer, and any images that you picked out, and they're going to create something for your customer. So if you can't afford a brand designer, and what I mean by that is literally you don't have the cash on hand, you can use a graphic designer, but you're going to have to spend a lot more time and sweat equity in making sure they're creating what you want. You've invested this time and this knowledge and you know the type you want. Now you've got to get that graphic designer on board. So you're going to have to explain the persona. You're going to have to explain the voice. You're going to have to explain what you want those colors to represent. I want it to be high trust. I want it to be this. I want it to be that. So once you get some comps, right? Some design comps, don't show them to friends and family. This is one of the biggest mistakes that people make. They show them to their friends and their family. Unless their friends and family are going to be buying from them consistently over the next 5 to 10 years, they are not the target audience. You need to get these in front of your target audience, trusted customers, trusted potential customers, and see what they think. Because everyone's going to have a different opinion. You're never going to get 100% agreement on the perfect logo because they're all looking at it through their own filter, their own lenses. And so you want to get a reaction from the people that matter the most, your customer base. So those are the folks that you're going to show it to, and be prepared. Not everyone is going to like it. What you want to do is you don't want to repel anybody. So here are my final thoughts, right? I talked about budget earlier. Definitely want you to have a brand designer, but I would say make sure, even if your budget is small, what you should do is really hire someone to do the entire process for you. Get a branding agency, getting a branding professional, not just the logo creation piece. Get them to do the persona, the voice of the customer, and the logo, because then they're going to have a full picture of the entire story and they've done a really deep dive into your business. And so that's what we do here at Inkyma. We're going to start the process right from the beginning, figuring out who that client is, how to talk to them, create the different versions of the brand, help you with your tagline, and then do that style guide. When someone says, will you do our branding for us? Those pieces are not negotiable to us because we think very strongly that they have to be part of the brand. Because this is your first attempt at trust, is when they see your brand. And so if you do a really good job of creating a brand, keeping it strong, you're going to keep and win all those customers. Here at Inkyma, we like to give back to the business community. I provide a free 45-minute consultation to any business owner. Maybe you want to talk about your website. Maybe you want to talk about a marketing strategy, one of my favorite conversations, or you want to talk about brand, or you want us to evaluate your existing brand. We can do one of those things or all of them. That 45 minutes is really up to you what you want to do. So just go to the website, inkyma.com, INKYMA.com. In the upper right-hand corner, there's a button to schedule a marketing evaluation. Pick your time and we are on the schedule together. Maybe you just have a quick question. Scroll down to the bottom, fill out the contact form, and I will respond. I hope you found this whole 3-part series informative and helpful. And if you did, tell your other business associates about it. If you've had that conversation over a cup of coffee that someone isn't happy with their logo, they don't feel like it's right, have them listen to this podcast so that maybe they can help figure that out. Thanks for listening and have an amazing day.